as the narrator becomes closer, entangled with a local girl, his speech is noticeably degraded, and he starts to talk increasingly in Creole English. And there are these hints of a moral decline, because when they are getting it on in Trinidad and so on, he is trying to read in a free state, which can't have been an accidental choice. And as they go further into this, there is this sense, this Napoleon sense of the center becoming unthinned, that when you immerse into this, and this is why I found it very interesting, because a lot of people seem to believe that this was your diary of your trip to the Caribbean, and you'd abandon this poor girl. But there was a sense that to confront a true love of Guyana in some way entailed a descent into something. And I would not say that that necessarily is a bad thing. That certainly seemed to be Martin Carter's view of Guyana, that to truly enter it was to abandon yourself to a pretty dark place, the nigger yard, as he put it, you know. And do you think that was that intentional, this unwinding of the English into increasing Creole as the relationship went on?
I think that particular aspect would be me trying to construct the intimacy of this particular relationship. It would be to try and show the growth of the narrative into something like the Guyanese. To show that journey a little bit, to show the dynamics, the lived dynamics of what a relationship like that might be. I don't think it didn't go to me as a thing of moral degradation.
Yeah, well, more than that, it's cultural and.
But the idea of the thing, you know, and one of the things, sorry to refer to your review of my book about this, is, you mentioned something about the gesture, and I think you wrote that it's unresolved what the gesture is. Is this just a friction of individuals, or is it larger friction? Gesture. I think there was a hint of that as well.
Okay.
It was the idea of characters getting involved. It's the idea of someone getting entangled in a place. It's the idea of someone leaving home and coming to a place where everybody else is at home.
Right.
It's the idea of a person like that confronting all the newness around him and finding ways to deal with it as something which works, resonates against the idea of the entire society being constructed in that way. With these very strange beginnings, almost fantastic. The idea of this colonial project is so mind-blowing. We're going to grow something here, we're going to pull people from here, pull them there, put them in chains, and just let's see what happens then between them. Then we're going to go away. I mean, thankfully, there's a lot of circumstances rubbing up against each other. And I think with the friction, with the characters, whether it's in the interior between Narada and Devi, or whether it's the final one, which is the more profound one, I want to try and examine the idea of these circumstances rubbing up against each other. And the energy benefit from that. Well, light and heat and creativity, but there's also friction. And it's a kind of friction which in some ways defines the Caribbean, and especially Southern Guyana, which is ethnically configured in a certain way. If you read Caires' Trust's book, she sort of traces how the friction between genders and how that came about. The scarcity of women and how that sort of had a profound effect on gender relations. And these were things I could try and intuit, could kind of see, and I was feeling my way around as a writer, looking at these things. That's why some parts of Caires' book were exhilarating to me, because they were giving me that knowledge into these things.
Right. Well, what I found about Bhattacharya's book was that it was best when it had nothing to say, because she excavated these archives and then she put her characters into situations for which there were no documentary, there was no documentary evidence. And then the questions that flowed once you had surrounded them with enough archival information were actually at the level of fiction.
Yes.
But what was different about your book was your book was a sort of positivist experiment. It was full of 1,000 facts of Guyana that all rang true, and they'd been gathered and shaped in a particular way. And one of the things that came through really strongly was that when an Indian sees other Indians, expatriate Indians, you've got this melancholy confrontation between the real Indian man and the Guyanese Indian, and you say you are as real as me, if not more so in a sense. And it struck me that we had our own version of this, because Naipaul, for all intents and purposes, is still a West Indian. And when he went out to India, he observed things about India that I don't think Indians were able to consume. And I felt that you had done this in reverse when you came here. For example, we were talking about this earlier, Naipaul has a brilliant essay on the sort of shape-shifting qualities of Mahatma Gandhi, hunting for the right look to be a mass market politician and finding it in the homespun clad beggar with specs, because that played better than anything else. And it struck me that when you came here and you looked and you said things like the Sindhi trader, well, nobody in Guyana would know what the hell that meant. But of course, looking at the surnames and so on, I started to think, well, oh God, of course they are probably all Sindhi traders, I've just never known that. And the last names and so on. So what, if anything, do you think you noticed that would be very hard for a Guyanese to notice, entangled as we are in the experience? Coming from outside, what struck you more vividly than what we know?
Yeah, because it's for the Guyanese to answer, I think, what...
Okay, well, I have a suggested answer, which is race.
Okay.
Because race is, from the Pakistan book, you can see that caste and religion and languages and so on divide India far more profoundly than race does Guyana. And so when you come here and you confront this, you speak about it with a candor that very, very few West Indian writers are prepared to manage in their books. And I personally found it exhilarating, because I think that art in these parts is considered a sort of sacred space that you don't violate with daily life. And
that's so odd, because Caribbean music gives you that more profoundly than music almost anywhere else. Daily life and he resistant towards it.
Well, yeah, but it migrated out of books and into music, I think, to a large extent. And I wanted to ask you about, there's 3 or 4 pages in the book in which this is met head on. And you talk about Roger Khan, and you brilliantly notice that he's pronounced Raja Khan, as though he is a kingly answer to the Indian vulnerabilities. And you said when Indians, Mr. Singh, who I think is at LBI, he says the problem is there was only one Roger Khan. We needed 100. And this follows a passage which says when Indians were being robbed, being butchered and robbed, Roger Khan had stepped up for them. He had changed the very self-image of the community. Well, anything that touches on this sets off about 300 letters in the newspaper, and anyone who says it is irredeemable racist and this and that, and there are protests everywhere. So to me it's very refreshing to see it handled with no agenda in fiction. And I think that's a great deal of the reason that this book struck such a chord. And yes, that's the sort of thing I'm talking about.
I think I recognize that. I recognize that from India. You grow up with prejudice in India. It's inescapable. 20 times a day. Religious, linguistic, caste, class, occupation. I've grown up with hearing people rant about something else or somebody else in the most sort of unenlightened, very liberal terms. And the idea, the construct of India was always to try and fight that. And it sometimes does, it's still a beautiful idea. It's not always very successful, it overrides all of those things. But that's something I recognized very instinctively when I came to Guyana. So I don't think I had trouble with reproducing that, because it sort of felt kind of organic to my experience of the world, not in terms of these ethnicities or along the lines of race, but along the lines of division. Also, I spoke about the idea of India, which is to try and override these differences and the idea of plurality.
Mm-hmm.
And the Caribbean has that as well. It's, underneath all these great racial frictions is also a sort of acquaintanceship, a very instinctive understanding of living with one another and multi-ethnicity. I found it could work at both levels. The political incorrectness is at once inflammatory and at another level also comforting. The way how openly people talk. I had the confidence to use that kind of dialogue in this book because I heard it over and over. Both in terms of casual usage of words which are supposed to be pejorative. I was convinced by my time over here that it's very much the language of the street. Also, some of the prejudices reproduced in there. I had heard worse, I had seen worse. In Guyana, I have heard worse and seen worse in India. And I think writers ought to be brave enough to try and put them down, and readers ought to be brave enough to try and confront them.